So is the market overly saturated with amp sims? Do we have too much? Can they all survive? Let's talk about it. So in the last year, the amp sim market has just exploded. And even within the last month, I've noticed at least 4 or 5 different products just popping up, brand new, out of nowhere, and it's kind of become a little overwhelming. We saw Bogren Digital expand their concept of the one knob into 3 different amp sims that all emulate some version of the 5150. Those are great sounding. Then we had the Tom Morello Neural DSP release. And then now we have things like Mixwave released the Spirit Box version of their plugin. There's also, the MLC 100 that Bogren just released that's fantastic. We've had Nembrini Audio release some unique plugins. And we've also seen some startup companies like APFX from Italy kind of throw their hat into the ring and make their own kind of do-it-all plugin. So what's the takeaway here, and where are we headed with this? So I went ahead and I threw it out there to a couple Facebook pages and even on my own community page, just kind of testing the waters for what people out there are thinking about. And it was overwhelming that a lot of people didn't really think that we're oversaturated, that we don't really have too many amp sims, but what we do have is a healthy competition of companies looking to compete for our dollars. It was pretty clear that most people thought the quality will win out. The best sounding things will win out. But it was also clear from some of the comments that what is best sounding isn't always the same criteria. And what I mean by that is some people are looking for accuracy. Some people want to have amps that sound exactly like the real thing that you would plug in your practice space, and they want it to sound exactly like a 5150, exactly like a Mesa rectifier, etc. But there was also a pretty healthy contingent of people who just wanted it to sound good and wanted it to sit in the mix really well. Sometimes those two things aren't the same, because if you've gone through a lot of the recent amp sims and some of the ones that are really well done and emulate the actual amp themselves, you end up having to do a bit of manipulation to the sound in a mix to make them sit well. And just like when you record with a real amp, you don't always get the best sound right out the gate. Now, this doesn't mean that your 5150, 6505, Mesa Boogie, boutique, driftwood amp, whatever you're using to record, it doesn't mean that it doesn't sound good when you track with it. What it means is for it to actually sit within a mix, you're going to have to do a little bit of manipulation with compression, EQ, etc. to, make it sound right when you actually have the song all put together. And a lot of times you'll notice with some of these amp sims, the standalone plugins, they can sound either overly dark, they can sound a little overly compressed, they can sound a little overly just not as exciting or textural as you would get in a recording where you're hearing these big, massive wall of sound guitars. And in working with amp sims and working with, just doing home recording, I kind of had this learning curve of what I was hearing isolated and what I was having to do to make it sound right in a mix were very kind of daunting. And I think for a lot of home recording players, the realization that, how it sounds by itself and how it sounds in a mix not being equal is kind of hard to kind of wrap your head around. Now, with that said, if you look at the amp sims that are coming out and you look at how they're kind of built and how they're marketed, you do see it kind of dividing into 2 paths. You see amp sims that are really trying to hit the nail on the head when it comes to what the amp is supposed to sound like. And you have other ones that are really trying to gear it more towards, this is a mix-ready sound, this is a sound that you can apply to almost any situation. And if you look at something like Tonex, Amplitube, or even some of the other companies like STL, you get a very true to form representation of a particular amp. But if you go to the other side of, the coin, you have plugins like the Audio 111111, or like even the Aurora Rhino, or even that APFX one that we just listened to. They're geared to be good sounding in a lot of situations and ready to be kind of dropped into a mix without a whole lot of manipulation. And then if we swing it back kind of in the middle, you kind of notice that companies like Neural DSP and Bogren Digital have kind of split the difference. They've taken what I would say is a very naturalistic amp sound and colored it in such a way that you get something that sounds pretty good in a mix without much, hassle. But you still get kind of a natural feel. And if you look at that brand new Sub-Zero plugin that just came out from Bogren Digital, the emulation of the MLC 100, it has this IRDX technology that they've developed where they're basically trying to take some harmonic distortion and some frequencies and a little bit of kind of manipulation of the sound itself to really give you that push-pull effect of actually miking up a speaker, as opposed to just applying the EQ curve of a simple IR wave file. And those kind of things, I think, are going to push those companies to the forefront of people wanting to actually purchase their products. So one of the biggest elephants in the room when asking these questions was, how many versions of the same amp do we need to see over and over and over again? And the big one that everybody keeps pointing to is the 5150. We have so many 5150 amps out there. Every time a new one pops up, people kind of have this collective eye roll and go, how is this going to be any better? How is this going to be any different? And the purists, the 5150 crowd, I think they're really looking for accuracy. They're really looking to hear something that really sounds like the amp that they have in their garage, bedroom, wherever. But that doesn't mean that every amp sim that comes out based on a 5150 is created equal. Now, all those amps are based on a 5150 of some sort. And you can hear that they're not all the same sounding. In fact, even the Bogren Digital ones that are based off of variations of the 5150 and the 6505 have subtle differences. Now, a lot of times you think to yourself, well, that's because, not every amp is created equal. Well, true. And sometimes people are actually targeting specific sounds out of amps. Now, one of those Bogren Digital amps is a modified 6505, so there's an actual modification going on in that circuitry. And the other ones are the original block letter 5150 and then the brand new 5153. Those two amps, even though they're inspired by the same technology, they're definitely not the same sounding kind of amps. And, anybody who owns either one of those can tell you that. Listening to the Neural DSP, there's a bit more coloration going on in that Nolly plugin. And then you go to the STL Josh Middleton, it's a much more kind of dry, naturalistic sound. So what it comes down to is that you just have different flavors for different folks who want certain things. So we obviously have companies out there who are nailing it when it comes to simplicity and accuracy of these amp models. But that doesn't mean that every company that comes out, is going to float to the top. Personally, I think Bogren Digital going the simplicity route first and using the one knob concept was genius. And it's a really great sounding product that sits in the mix really well. It's not the most accurate representation of an amp per se, but it is really good sounding. And if we look at their brand new MLC 100, they've pretty much done an amazing job capturing a mix-ready sound with a lot of options for tonality. That amp is honestly one of the only ones that I have in my collection where I can pull up any of the presets that they have already preloaded and I don't have to do anything. But we have other companies out there who are really focusing in more on the do-it-all aspect. One of the best examples of that available right now is the Aurora Audio Rhino, which if you have that or if you've seen it, it's got kind of a unique interface and it's got some features that you won't see in any other amp plugin. The super unique interface that they've come up with here is unlike anything else out there, and it really does give you all these, expandable modules. I've already done kind of a quick overview of this in one of my other videos, and they've updated it, they've kept it updated, they've integrated Bogren digital IRs, and it is just a fantastic platform for getting sounds that have nothing to do necessarily with a particular amp. It's just a plugin for all kinds of sounds. But what about the people who are out there clamoring for accurate representations of amps that are kind of niche or somewhat, underrepresented in the metal community? I think Nembrini Audio has gone to extreme lengths to capture some pretty interesting amp types that you don't typically get from other companies. In fact, they just released an amp sim based off the Mesa Boogie tri-axis rack-mounted preamp. Not too many companies are out there doing a whole lot of preamp rack-mounted equipment emulations. And a couple months ago, I reviewed their Hardball, which is basically an emulation of the Engel Powerball 2, and it's a really great sounding amp to me. So with that amp, just kind of like the Josh Middleton amp, those tones are much more kind of naturalistic, accurate. But with the Nembrini stuff, you're getting a bit more of that niche kind of off the beaten path sound. So we have simplicity, we have accuracy, we have mix-ready stuff, we have companies that are trying to target more unique amplifier types. But the other big component of this that people are concerned about is price. I put it out there, I asked, will price influence, what you do when it comes to buying stuff? And of course, everybody said, yeah, of course, price is going to influence whether or not I want to jump on, to some product. But surprisingly, or maybe not, price didn't seem to be as much of a factor as quality. People are willing to pay for quality user interfaces, support, quality sound, and quality, features that are somewhat, unique. Whether that's unique amplifiers or just, unique technology like the IRDX stuff that Bogren's doing. It seemed like people really liked having the options, but also are willing to kind of shell out the cash for something a little bit more polished. And I think that's true when you look at, Neural DSP. They're still kind of top of the heap when it comes to, the most products sold and, who's out there getting their name kind of used in, on professional recordings, etc., and getting, names to kind of come and buy into their product. I think that has a lot to do with their marketing, but also that their user interfaces are pretty stellar, and their cab sections, IRs, that they tweak it enough to where you get some new stuff here and there, and they seem to update stuff with every release. Now, a lot of people have gripes with them regarding support for those amplifier types in the Neural DSP catalog going onto the Quad Cortex. There's issues with them updating older plugins with new features and just general support. So I don't think that Neural DSP has it locked down completely. And I think if they ever do make the jump to where they actually get those archetypes and some of those standalone amplifiers onto their Quad Cortex, they will dominate even the live stuff. Like their Quad Cortex will become that much more worth paying, $1,500 for. That doesn't mean that price doesn't influence people quite a bit. In fact, when it comes down to it, you might want a product, but you look at your pocketbook and go, well, maybe not this month, or maybe I'll wait for the discounts. And I think more and more people are expecting companies to, offer discounts or, come up with introductory prices or keep pricing somewhat on the low side, because there's so much out there that if someone were to drastically increase their prices, they probably wouldn't get the traffic that they once had. And I think that's provable by just looking at how often we're seeing companies offer some sort of discount or offer some sort of introductory price. In fact, I think this last year I saw Neural DSP offer a couple extra discount periods that I hadn't seen before. And that's probably a smart thing to do, because getting people to buy some of those older plugins is probably just as important as getting people to buy the new stuff. But I could hear some of you through the screen going, but wait, we have companies that are out there doing quality work for pretty cheap, much cheaper than Neural DSP, even much cheaper than Bogren Digital. We have two that I can think of that come to mind right now. One is ML Sound Lab. They produce some pretty good free stuff. They've partnered with like Ryan Bruce. They've partnered with other artists to create, pretty good plugins that are very accurate and, very user-friendly. And they're not really expensive. On average, you're paying like, I don't know, I think the most expensive one is like €39 or like, $40 US. Even then, they have some that go on discount for closer to like half of that. But there's also a company out of Mexico called Audio Assault. And they sell their plugins for what I would consider to be dirt cheap, $5 to $7. And they give out free stuff too. They had a Blackstar amp that was free forever, and it was one of the best sounding free amps that you could get. Now they've come out with their amp locker, which is basically an all-in-one suite where you can put all of your amplifier plugins. They give you a free one called Prestige, but they've also released a couple of the best sounding dual rectifier and 5150 amps that you can get. They're only $7 a piece. So that dual rectifier plugin has easily become one of my favorite recto style, amp sims. And it was only $7. It has so much depth, texture, and the way that they've kind of redone their whole IR scheme in some of these new plugins, definitely worth the price of investment. In fact, it's almost criminal for nobody who's watching this or who does amp sim stuff to not check out Audio Assault and just kind of buy their whole catalog, because you could probably get almost all of it for, $100. I still hear some of you in the back. In fact, there's a much larger contingency of people who are probably going, there's free stuff that is becoming so much more powerful than we ever realized, and that is the neural amp modeler stuff. And this is free open source software. This is stuff that ChatGPT developers, people who know what they're doing when it comes to coding. Steve Atkinson basically said, I want to create a platform where anybody can do what you can do with like the Tonex stuff, and you can do it at home using your own reamp box, whatever. Like, here's the code, here's what it is. And I've done a few videos on Neural Amp Modeler now, and it's insanely crazy how accurate some of these captures are getting, and even some of the IRs that people are producing as a result of them experimenting at home and just opening this stuff up for free. And if you go on tonehunt.net and you go to the ChatGPT page, go get the Neural Amp Modeler. It's all free, it's all open source. You play with it and you'll go, maybe I'll never buy another plugin again. I don't think that's particularly going to be the case in the economy as a whole, because while there are a lot of people who really enjoy the Neural Amp Modeler stuff and it is really great, there's a whole lot of other people, and in fact the majority of people, who really like having stuff kind of built for them a little bit more polished, a little bit more kind of established as, a real supported product. But I mean, to be honest, the NAMM stuff is pretty well supported, and the community is pretty well kind of glued together in terms of giving you everything you need. So Will that become kind of a hit to the overall amp sim economy? Maybe. On the other hand, it's probably just going to drive, the paid for stuff to become more competitive. It's going to kind of force the hand of the companies to become more adept at creating new and unique things. And I can only see it as a net win for everybody when you have, something as competent as Neural Amp Modeler out there kind of driving the companies who want you to pay for their stuff to basically say, here's how we set ourselves apart from just, capturing your own rig at home or just using something that sounds like a real amp. And I think of all the companies out there that are doing this kind of work, I'm going to probably put Bogren Digital up at the top of the list, because what they've done recently and what they've been able to do is create an environment of tones that are simple to use, very competently well crafted. The user interfaces are beautifully done, and there's little things that they've kind of accomplished that kind of set them apart a little bit. Not to mention, when you throw one of their tones into a mix, it just sits really well. So I'm going to leave you guys here with some, things to think about. I want to hear your comments. I want to hear what you think about this whole thing. And I'm going to pull up some Neural Amp Modeler stuff and kind of jam out for a minute while you, comment down below. So thanks.